and welcome to another installment of Loremaker's Guide to the Galaxy. My name is Dave Haddock. I am the lead writer over here at Cloud Imperium Games. And if this is your first experience with Loremakers, let me bring you up to speed. We have a lot of star systems in Star Citizen, and each of those systems have their own particular history and flavor and whatnot. And so we use this show as an opportunity to delve into some of the particularly interesting aspects of each system and try to provide some insight as to not only like the system itself, but sort of why we picked the things that we picked to make it the way it is. So this episode was a bit of a challenge. Before we do tape these shows, you know, in the writers' room, we tend to circle up and figure out who's going to do what system and stuff like that. So when talking it over with Will, Sherry, and Adam, we started realizing that we are quickly running out of systems because we've been doing this for a little while. So we raised the question of what we're going to do after we deplete our supply. Should we tackle corporations next? Do we do deeper dives on specific cities or landing zones, planets, et cetera? You know, do we go back and do time capsules that we did in the initial crowdfunding phase? That was the timeline of that leads from modern day to the Star Citizen era. So yeah, it was an interesting thing. So I don't know, wanted to post to you guys and see what you were interested in. If you have any ideas, feel free to post them in the comments below. So anyway, long story short, it was a little tricky to pick out a system. I had done a couple, but I ended up going with the Hadrian System. This is actually another one of our older systems. It was originally a part of our system unlock in the initial crowdfunding phase. It's basically kind of been with us since the beginning, and back then it was basically a much more kind of high-level view of it. And yes, obviously it's named Hadrian after the Roman emperor and wall that separated Britain. And it was named that because it was basically, its original position was it was going to be the sort of border system between human and Xi'an during a sort of Cold War-esque tension thing, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's jump right in and get the astrographic stuff out of the way. So let's go to our trusty star map here. And as always, we're going to start off on Earth just to give you a sense of kind of where the system lines up basically in the galaxy. So let's zoom out, and turn on jump points. And I'm going to go to 2D because it's easier to navigate. So Sol system over here, so Earth. And just to call it out, you have Terra over here. Hadrian System is right here. And so the important thing, again, obviously, is the fact that it's kind of close to all of these systems, which are Xi'an-controlled systems. It's also got a lot of jump points connected to it, which is kind of fun too. But it is directly connected to Castra and Keel, which is kind of important because that basically, and actually Baker too, kind of form the wall that the name of the system is sort of referring to. Now, the eagle-eyed people in our crowd might notice, well, the systems that are connected to Hadrian, Gurzel, and Oya up here are technically blue. They're UEE ones, which is true, but they weren't always that way. These systems, along with Tohil, Horus, Pallas, Hader, Indra, and there we go, Virtus over here, were actually part of what was known as the Peri line. And so, but we'll get back to that and go into it. So getting into the system itself with Hadrian, we'll kind of start to zoom in on this. Hadrian actually wasn't the original name of the system. It was actually named Nivelin, which is named the founder of the company who originally discovered the system from Pyro. Interestingly enough, that was where the first jump point was discovered. And they ended up selling it because the company was actually kind of broke and needed the money. So it was discovered in 2510, and let's jump in here, and we have a big star right in the middle, which is interesting because it's actually technically a red dwarf star. So it is somewhat big. So zooming out, You can kind of see we have Hadrian 1, Hadrian 2, Hadrian 3. Now the interesting thing actually, aside from the sort of red dwarf, is that Hadrian 1 and Hadrian 2 are actually gas giants. That's kind of, weirdly enough, and also kind of in what's now, I guess, the green zone of the star. And then you've got a asteroid belt, which I think is represented, the Hadrian belt. And then on the outskirts you have Hadrian 3, which is actually nicknamed, which is an ice giant, I believe, nicknamed the Watcher because it has a large dark spot on the sort of otherwise pale planet. And yeah, so you got two gas giants and an ice giant. So at the time, the UNE couldn't really do much with this. There's not a lot to terraform here. So there wasn't a lot going on for Nivelin's system as far as like sending inhabitants and stuff like that. But there was an asteroid field and planets and stuff, so there's opportunities for resources. So they kind of opened it up for resource harvesting, and particularly in the asteroid belt. So again, it was discovered in 2510, so flash forward a bit, and we're actually going to zoom out here, because in 2530, humanity discovered the Xi'an. And discovered is an interesting way of putting it. To give it some context, basically at that time, humanity was sort of in the thrall of a massive expansion thing. So there was, the idea is like jump drives were becoming more accessible, so more people were kind of in space and able to sort of start scanning for jump points, and terraforming tech was starting to be refined. So basically there was this huge push and just influx of people just getting out there and trying to kind of discover new systems and new resources and stuff like that. So, kind of unsurprisingly, this led to a lot of greed and kind of questionable behavior. And so anyway, so when Oya's system was discovered, a small terraforming outfit basically like blazed into the system, sort of desperately trying to stake a claim, and started to set up their terraforming machines on a planet, and didn't really check to see if the planet was actually uninhabited. And it turned out it wasn't. So, hi Xi'an, that's how we met. So in 2539, they discovered this jump point into Gurzil, and basically that wasn't that big a deal in and of itself, but when a Xi'an scout ship popped into the system from an unknown jump point, suddenly Hadrian system, or Nivelin's system, was now sort of at the forefront of a lot of basically the Xi'an Empire. So the UPE sealed it off from civilian use, and the military moved in. Now, again, bear in mind, right now the tensions with them were high, but it was not war yet. But at the same time, they were just trying to play it safe and stuff like that. And they had still a couple of years before the First War with the Tavaran, which was real bad. Anyway, so once Ivar Messer rose to power, he used this sort of this undercurrent of paranoia about the Xi'an and kind of fed it. He sort of he would feed it with this sort of sense of like an inevitable invasion that would one day come, and all this stuff, and fear of the Xi'an and stuff like that, as a way to sort of cement his power and whatnot. And he even very famously implicated what he said were Xi'an assassins were responsible for a series of bombings against civilian population centers, and that was one of the things that catapulted him into sort of this new what was called the prime citizen, which he later revamped to become the imperator, and basically seize control entirely of the government, which led to several centuries of despots, which is So anyway, so during the Messer reign, basically they constantly had the Xi'an as a bad guy, a sort of the boogeyman that they could always kind of loom over the people as something like, you need us to help keep them at bay type thing. So basically there was that thing with war was kind of in the air, and Hadrian, as it was renamed now to reflect the sort of the wall mentality, was the center point. So you have Hadrian, Castra, and Kiel are now connected to these systems up here, which formed the Perry line. So this was basically kind of the no man's land. So right on the other side of no one inhabited these systems, and right on the other side of these systems were connected to Xi'an ones. So they basically just sort of demilitarized all of these and then set up watch points in all of these systems to keep an eye on making sure that no one was coming in and through these jump points. So the military would like lace the area with mines, military bases, battle groups, basically all prepping for a war that, I mean, they didn't know this at the time, but would never come. And that's kind of how it stayed for a really long time, this very kind of tense stalemate of paranoia and fear and, just sort of chomping at the bit, fingers on triggers type thing, waiting for the Xi'an to make a move, and vice versa, them waiting for us to get aggressive and make a move. So it was definitely, took two to tango in that one. So that was basically the status quo in Hadrian. So it was primarily a military system. Civilians weren't allowed there. Tons of weapons and ordnance and stuff like that were sort of laced around, and anti-invasion countermeasures and stuff like that. And that was basically it. So once the messengers were finally ostracized and the new government kind of stepped in, a big aspect of it was ratcheting down and sort of de-escalation, like taking away a lot of the tension that had existed between us and the Xi'an. And so in 2793, they basically dissolved the Perry line. So all of these systems basically were divided between the UEE and the Xi'an, and in sort of an attempt to kind of let people back in and breed more trust between the two. But interestingly enough, now Hadrian has sort of lost its sense of purpose. Because again, it sort of had its identity defined by the fact that it was the sort of the center point, kind of tip of the spear type thing against the Xi'an invasion, and now it didn't have that. So, and again, it was not like there were landing zones or planets or stuff like that where people could live and develop their own kind of culture. The culture was military and war. So in the wake of this, while there were discussions about reopening the system for mining opportunities and stuff like that, unfortunately, centuries of ordnance, and anti-invasion tech and all this stuff that was scattered throughout the system made it really tough to fly around, basically, really dangerous. So, the military tried to clean out what they could, but the idea was that there was still a very high potential that there were old munitions kind of just lurking out there in space. So it was very dangerous and stuff. So they're trying to kind of, clean it up. But interestingly enough, now, Hadrian's sort of poised to be at start a new chapter in its existence, basically. As we've been talking about in a lot of the news updates, recently there was the passage of the Human Xi'an Trade Initiative, or HUSHA, and Hadrian basically is sort of poised to be sort of a main travel point now. It's obviously you can see connected to Terra, and could be a kind of a major way into into Xi'an space. So it basically has kind of the potential to open up a lot of trade from both sides coming through and help maybe give it that identity that's been sort of lacking. So that's basically Hadrian historically. Now, as far as the sort of character and flavor for the system itself, for me, one of the things that was sort of appealing about them as a system was having this idea of sort of being haunted by the specter of war. We sort of allude to that in a couple other ones. Hades, for example, is sort of the relics of this sort of ancient battle. It's that sort of ancient battlefield thing where it's just like, we don't know exactly what happened, but whatever lived there is dead, and we can see the effects of that devastating war. But Hadrian was different, because Hadrian is basically sort of war unfulfilled. And there was something just kind of fun about that concept, like it was there, it was poised to fight, but it never actually did. And then it had to kind of ratchet itself down. So, you have the system that was cultivated for war and now forced to kind of figure out who it is. And which is actually something it kind of shares with Castra, that was also going through a similar kind of identity crisis. But at the same time, Castra, has planet-side locations and stuff like that, and they've started to build their own culture, but Hadrian doesn't have that to fall back on, so it'll be kind of interesting to see sort of how they how they handle it. So that was just sort of what was sort of the fun challenge with it. So yeah, that's basically Hadrian in a nutshell, and that'll do it for this episode of Loremaker's Guide to the Galaxy. As always, I urge everybody to check out the star map on our site, because it can give you fun additional tidbits about all the planets and systems and stars and kind of points of interest that you can find in the universe. If you're interested in reading more about Hadrian itself, subscribers can go back and read a galactic guide we did about it in the April 2017 issue of Jump Point. So you can read that there. I think Will wrote it. It's very, very cool. And speaking of subscribers, I'd just like to thank all of you for your additional support that help us make content like this, and ATV and Bug Smashers and Happy Hour and all that good stuff. And of course, a big, huge thank you to all of our backers who have helped us build this incredible thing that we're building. So yeah, I'm Dave Haddock, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.